Okay. So, as far as the bell work, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to work on that. Is anybody finished with it? You looked at it? You guys are already done? Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you guys like a couple minutes to do the bell work, and then we will get into the notes. So it looks like we have plenty of time for the notes. I'm still trying to figure out my own pacing and how much I'm allowed to talk without it being annoying. So if the notes drag on today and they're really boring, I'm going to try and not let them be. But if the notes drag on today, don't get mad at me. It'll probably get better over the course of the week. I did it once before and it took like 50 minutes. So that's a long time. And I don't want to do that every time. So how long does she usually spend on notes?
Not very long.
Not very long. She just goes right through them. Okay. Well, I'll probably incorporate a little bit of that, but I kind of talk a lot. So I'll try and get better about it. But today I might have a little bit too much fun today. So let me see. Online people, I'm going to need your help really quick because I'm going to try and present this to you guys. But last time when I presented it, it looked like I was presenting it, but it wasn't actually, because I tried to do a recording for you guys so that you wouldn't have to worry about me rambling and you could just fast forward stuff. But we'll see if I can figure this out. Sharing. You all see this? Online people?
Yes.
Yeah, you got that? Okay. Oscar, what if I present it? Is it still going forward for you? Like when I'm clicking these buttons?
No, it looks the same.
I don't know why. See, that's the issue that I ran into last time. So, but if I do this, then you can see it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we'll just go based off this. That's totally fine. Thank you, Oscar. So if I start on day 3, if I switch these PowerPoints, you can see this, Oscar? You can see me switching it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So we'll just do this. I guess it happens when I do presenting or something like that. So, all right. So we'll probably skip out on current events until the end of class because I don't know exactly how I think she just reads current events to you guys and just goes through them?
Yeah.
Right? Do you guys have to do anything for that?
No.
Okay, it's just going through current event news. Okay. So that's something we'll get to a little bit later. If we have extra time, we'll do that. She has a World War II project on there. She talked about that at all? World War II project? Okay. It's probably something that we'll get to either at the end of class or next class because I don't think I see it on here yet. That or I'll talk to her and see what we can do. As you guys might realize, this was all kind of last minute, so there will probably be some confusion at first. Okay. As far as the bell ringer, what'd you guys find? What do you guys think? Bell ringer. So if the question is, what's the difference between these neutrality acts and what's the difference between neutrality and the kind of Lend-Lease Act? What do we find? Yeah.
The Lend-Lease Act allowed the war effort, and the Neutrality Act prohibited the export of arms and implements of war to foreign nations who were at war.
Yeah, exactly. So you have the Neutrality Act, which is it's in the name, right? It's aimed at kind of keeping us out of a lot of things. As you guys saw again last class with a lot of the stuff that you were dealing with, after Pearl Harbor happened, do you think we're going to stay the course of neutrality? Probably not, right? Probably not. And so that does mean that we need to kind of take into account some of the legislation and the stuff that we put forward. What you see with the Neutrality Act is that it actually started off, there's a bunch of different ones. So there's one in like 1935, I think there's one in 37, and then there's one in 39. And it's gradually kind of stripping away, the restrictions. Neutrality Act has started off, like you said, you can't export any like weapons or ammo or any of this other stuff to these countries at war. 1939, there's the embargoes repealed, right? So we're like, okay, well, we're starting to open this up a little bit. It allowed, kind of a sale of arms and trade. but the prohibition against the U.S. and their ability to kind of transport a lot of these goods is still up. What happens with the Lend-Lease Act, though, is basically we're like, all right, well, we'll just give you this stuff, right? So you're lending them the things. One of the things that I believe it was FDR said was, we're not even lending this. We're actually buying our security. So the idea is that you've given this, weapon or tanks or planes or whatever you're giving to the Allied powers without necessarily still being involved in the war yet. You are supporting without entering the war. So it's like a final step of how close can we get to being in the war without actually being in the war. As far as today's topics go, we got Rosie the Riveter, Executive Order 9066, Korematsu versus the United States, rationing, D-Day, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the Manhattan Project. Does any of this stuff ring a bell to you guys? Any of these words? What words stand out to you? What do you see on there that you've seen before? D-Day, Hiroshima, Okinawa, yeah. What about Rosie the Riveter? You guys heard of that?
Yeah, wasn't it almost like American propaganda?
Yeah, or almost even maybe a feminist icon at a certain point. And so Rosie the Riveter. Has anybody ever heard of Executive Order 9066? I'd reckon that you probably have, but you probably don't realize that you have just because of the name. Korematsu versus the United States is a Supreme Court case that we'll talk about. Has anybody ever heard of the Manhattan Project? Or there's a Marvel superhero, Mr. Manhattan or something like that, or is that that's DC, I think. I don't know. But yeah, so that's the thing that we'll talk about today. Essential questions: how did the home front contribute to the war effort? What are the major turning points of the war? Did the atomic bombs actually contribute to the defeat of Japan? These are all things that are still talked about today, whether or not the atomic bombs needed to happen. As far as turning points of the war, there's I swear every other battle is a turning point, right? It's what it feels like. Looking at what you guys talked about last week, there was a lot of turning points in that, but you also have plenty of turning points this week. The home front is absolutely interesting when it comes to kind of the war effort for sure. So looking at day 4 and where we're starting, talking about the home front, you have new opportunities for women and minorities, new opportunities for people hoping to get equal rights. Unemployment that plagued the U.S. during the Depression drops dramatically during the war. Essentially ends the Great Depression. As you can imagine, has anybody ever seen the movie War Dogs? It's on Netflix.
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? The idea with that movie is that there's basically these guys who are arms dealers, okay? And they realize that they can make a large amount of money off of war. Here's the thing with war, is that it is it's kind of a moneymaker. War can make you a large amount of money depending on what side you're in, right? Depending on are you on the winning side or are you on the losing side. For example, the U.S.'s GDP rose from 200 million in 1940, which is still a lot back then, right? With inflation and everything. Rose from 200 million in 1940 to 300 million in 1950 and more than 500 million in 1960. That's a very clear indicator. Your GDP is basically telling you how healthy your economy is, how well everybody's doing. It's a measure of how comfortable you'd probably be living in that place. As you can see, it's going up. It's getting higher. Okay. New opportunities for women, obviously, in the workplace. You have Rosie the Riveter right here. Women are making up 1/3 of the workforce. They're replacing men in factories. They're doing a ton of different things. They're working as streetcar operators. They're working as taxi drivers and construction workers. It looks like this lady right here is building an airplane cockpit or something. They're working as steel workers, lumber workers. These are all male-dominated jobs even today. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. You're welcome. You got it? So again, they're replacing men in a lot of these factories. Why are they replacing men? What's the deal?
Because a lot of men are going to war.
Yeah, all the men are gone, right? If you're an able-bodied man during this time, you have the draft, right? A lot of men are away at war. A lot of men during this time volunteered to go to war. So a lot of people were drafted, but a lot of people were like, all right, well, this is something that I can really get behind, right? So a lot of men are away at war. A lot of the men who were in these factories and doing all these things before. So like I said, lumber workers, munitions workers, agricultural workers. Women are kind of taking over, government workers, right? Women are taking over. This is in direct opposite of the kind of stereotypes that women were dealing with at the time. During this time, oftentimes you think of the nuclear family, right? The wife who stays at home and raises the kids and does the housework and does all these other kind of gendered stereotype things. You basically see the government and other people in the United States going like, all right, just kidding for a little bit at least, right? Don't do all that stuff. Instead, get in the factory, right? Get in the factory, make some planes, load up some bullets, right? Do your civic duty. Do what you need to do for the United States. And it's funny almost to see how quickly you can flip that gendered norm and that stereotype on its head when you need something out of that population. So you do see, even though obviously it seems to be that women are kind of like, we need you now, so like get in there. Even though that's happening, you do see that this does kind of push women more towards a, obviously we're not, even today there's inequalities and stuff, but this does push women more towards opportunities of equality. So you see that a lot. You also see things like rationing. Has anybody ever heard of rationing? Am I going too fast, by the way? Am I going okay? Is this about how fast she goes? Okay, good. All right. So rationing. It's a form of economic control. Americans are issued this coupon card, basically, a book of coupons. You have your ration set. You go to stand in a line. They would stamp your ration book. They would give you your rations, and you would go on with your day. But you were limited to the amount of goods, right? You're limited to the amount of goods. Do you guys think that rationing was just like an easy thing that just went over super well? Probably not, right? People have a hard enough time, like we talked about earlier, people have a hard enough time just wearing a mask. So do you think people are going to have a hard time with the government telling them how much food they can have? Probably, right? Probably. Something that a lot of people aren't used to. Maybe they dealt with it a little bit during like Depression era, right? So maybe they are used to it to some extent. But the idea of limiting anybody's food or anybody's, buying or anything like that goes directly against what a lot of people view the United States as. So there are some issues with rationing, things like food shortages, people getting mad that they had to wait in lines, right? Waiting in line to get something like, I don't know, margarine or butter, bacon, right? Maybe you wait in line all day to get some butter, and then as soon as you get up there, the dude's like, butter's all gone, right? Then what? That's what you need. It's one of those essential things that you need maybe for cooking. Maybe something like coffee. You might ration your coffee. Why? So that who can have it? Who gets it? If I ration my stuff on the home front, where's that stuff going? Yeah, to the soldiers, right? It's going to the soldiers. So if I stop drinking as much coffee at home, the idea is that by me doing that, I am basically contributing to the war effort by being a little bit less selfish and giving it to somebody who's maybe freezing cold in the middle of Europe that is, all they want is a nice cup of coffee, right? Something like that. Or things like margarine and all these other meats, right? A lot of things were rationed in that way. A lot of people did get mad about this stuff, but, it worked out, I guess, over time. As far as war bonds go, anybody ever heard of a bond? Yeah, you've heard of it. You know what a bond is? Or like the general idea behind it? It's okay if you don't. It's almost outdated. Have you heard of a bond? Yeah, a bond is it's like a loan, all right? But it's a loan that you give to the government. So you basically get to play like the Uno reverse card on the government for once. The government has given me loans, right? I am expected to pay them back in the future, probably with a little bit of interest so that the government makes some money off of it, okay? The idea here is kind of the same thing. If I'm loaning money to the government, the idea is that I'll get that money back in the future with interest, okay? So it's a way for you to make money, maybe, right? If all works out. I mean, who's to say? You buy a bunch of war bonds and then we lose the war and Hitler's in charge. You're probably not going to get your money back. But if you're betting on the United States government and the American military and the allied powers, and you're giving them money, the idea is that maybe you'll get that money back with a little bit of extra on top. So a lot of people did go around and buy war bonds. How did women and minorities get new opportunities during World War II? What did we see for that? Anybody? What were women doing more so? What's the switch?
Working in male-populated.
Yeah, working in construction, building airplanes, filling bullet shells, bullet casings, all this other stuff. And how did it help pull the U.S. out of the Great Depression? Obviously, we have that going on in kind of like the 30s, the downfall of the Roaring 20s. What happens there is just in all this manufacturing and all these other things, you're building up an abundance of money. Your GDP is rising a lot, and you are basically making a ton of money off of war, right? Name some ways citizens supported the war effort. There's a bunch of different ways, but some of the ones that we talked about, rationing, right? Rationing is important. Buying bonds, working in factories, leaving behind maybe your gendered stereotypes that you've been so comfortably conditioned to be in for a while, and getting out of that zone, right? That's a new thing for a lot of women, is to move out of their place that they've almost been forced into a different area that they've now been forced into, and going through and carrying out all these kind of male-dominated duties. And they did an excellent job at it, by the way. They did a fantastic job at it. I believe there was like 6 million different women that ended up joining the workforces during this time. This is where we get into some of the more heavy stuff. All right, so we have the Executive Order 9066. Again, yeah, you probably just didn't realize because of the name. But the Executive Order 9066, this is when 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were removed. When we say removed, they were basically picked up and put into these kind of like watch camps. I don't want you to get the wrong idea and think that these are like U.S. concentration camps, okay? It's not necessarily that type of vibe. That being said, they're not great, right? They're not good. This is a bad part of American history. This is one of those parts where this is not this is almost like a stain on American history. Like it's not a good thing. Okay. So I don't want to over exaggerate what was going on, but I also don't want to underappreciate what was going on as well. You shouldn't correlate them with the concentration camps that are happening in Europe, but you should look at them for the negative, the negative thing that they are, right? So you have 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast are removed. I'm going to butcher this, so I'm not even going to try. I think it's the Issei or Issei. I tried anyway. Japanese immigrants, you have them who are I think they're first generation more so. And then you have native-born American citizens. What's happening is you're gathering up all of these people simply because they're Japanese or they look Japanese, right? That's obviously a problem. A lot of these people are forced to sell their property at a loss. A lot of these people, you see right here, I am an American. This guy owns a grocery store. A woman owns a grocery store, one of the two. Worried, scared to death that they're going to be basically kidnapped almost, taken away from their possessions and have their stuff sold and essentially lose the life that they worked to get, right? This goes against the kind of idea of the American dream almost, that thing that dominated a lot of the ideology during this time. People are afraid, and rightfully so. There's a bunch of different things that happen here, but it's more about what's going on in the internment camps than how it's set up. You have a bunch of different kind of situations happening here. The biggest issue with the camps was less about the living conditions, I feel, right? They weren't good living conditions by any means. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat that. They weren't good. But it's less about the living conditions, and it's more about the kind of violence and racism that was known to run rampant during those camps, right? Whether it be at the hands of guards or officials, whoever's involved in that, these people were not treated well at all. They weren't treated well. And this is Japanese men, women, and children. We have this court case, all right? We have this court case. It's Korematsu versus the United States. And I think that this does a really good job of outlining just how crazy this stuff kind of was. Korematsu versus the United States. You have this guy. His name is Fred Fred Korematsu. He's 23 years old, so he's my age, right? Young guy. He's a Japanese American citizen, and he didn't comply. He said, "All right, you guys are trying to pick me up and steal my stuff and bring me over here and make me lose out on my my family business." Essentially, he's like, "I'm not doing it." So he says he's going to stay behind. All right, so Korematsu stays behind. He actually takes some pretty drastic measures, things that I didn't know about until I was looking through this court case. Fred Korematsu actually, he had plastic surgery on his eyes to alter them to make himself look less Japanese, right? So there's already an extent that people are jumping through simply to avoid racial stereotyping and racism and violence, altering one's appearance, right? If that gives you any idea of how like stressful this must have been for anybody, right? This is not something that I've ever had to deal with. The idea of having to alter my appearance to fit in, to be safe, getting plastic surgery on my eyes simply to be treated like a normal person. It reminds me a lot of the kind of the backlash that many people who are of Chinese descent are dealing with right now with coronavirus. I've lived with a couple of people who are from China at this point, like randomly matched this year. I don't know. I've lived like with 2 people from China this year. And they have told me themselves that they have experienced like an uptick in people, you know, treating them differently. It reminds me, it's a similar thing to me because, you know, obviously a lot of these Japanese Americans, they're not associated with Pearl Harbor. They're Japanese Americans. They're like you and I. They just happen to be Japanese. They didn't coordinate an attack on the United States, but simply because of their descent and their ancestry and their race, they're kind of targeted as such. So Fred changes his eyes, changes his name to Clyde Sarah. I don't know why he chose that. I think he could have gone with a cooler one, but he did it anyway. And he claimed that he was Spanish and Hawaiian. Obviously, he didn't get away with this. Fred did make a lot of strides in the right directions towards masking his identity. But about 6 months later, the FBI eventually arrested him. They found out, and again, that just goes to show you that the FBI is going that hard on this, that they're finding one random guy who chose not to report to the camp and went through the lengths of literally changing his identity. All right. So the FBI finds him, and Fred basically agrees to have this case happen. But what happens is he goes against the United States. He says, "I think that these internment camps are unconstitutional." And what does the government say? What do you think the government says?
Too bad.
Basically, the government says, "Too bad," essentially, right? They basically use the fact that it's a wartime effort as a justification, right? The fact that you're in war and there was an attack on the United States, they use all these things as justification, essentially. We also have the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. These guys are kind of like, I don't know, they're kind of crazy, right? They're a little insane. I think they had upwards of like 18,000 different awards, 21 medals of honor, I think was the number. And then on top, I think this is all of them meeting with Barack Obama right here. But that being said, with a lot of these guys, I mean, their motto was go for broke. So basically they were just all out, right? They were just like, you didn't want to run into the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in World War II. They were a all-Maasai regiment. So a lot of these guys were actually from internment camps or had family in internment camps. So the irony of being, it reminds me again, almost a little bit of the way that we treated African slaves back then during Civil War, you know, the irony of having people in shackles yet still fighting for you. You have many Japanese American citizens locked up in camps, yet volunteering and making their way out and fighting for you in a battle, right? What is internment? That's basically just, you know, internment is essentially just, you know, being locked up, right? Being caught or contained. Did the Supreme Court find Executive Order 9066 to be constitutional? Yes or no? Was it good? They say yeah, or they said no? Say yeah, right? They said, yeah, it's okay for you to intern Japanese American citizens, basically. Yeah. So that's what they're doing. They find it to be constitutional. Am I going too fast still, or is everybody okay? Online, you guys good? I know I haven't talked to you much. I'm just here.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Oscar. All right. So looking at Eisenhower, right? Looking at Eisenhower and the D-Day invasion. Eisenhower is the supreme commander, right? Operation Overlord. Okay, Operation Overlord. Has anybody ever seen that movie, Overlord? I think that it has ties into it. I think it's a J.J. Abrams movie. It just came out a couple years ago. But the idea with Overlord is it's an invasion of occupied France. So with Overlord, it is your major advancement in the process of controlling Europe. It is the prerequisite to D-Day. It's basically like if I'm going to accomplish something as crazy as D-Day, I need to have more control over Europe before I even think about doing that. So Overlord is where you come in handy. Okay, Overlord is that operation. You have like 160,000 troops, basically a large amount of people coming through over the English Canal, over the English Channel, and eventually about 2 million Allied troops are in France by the end of August. I don't believe that they have Paris at this time. Paris happens a little bit later, but they're making strides in the right direction towards gaining that major kind of area. Okay. Like I said, this is a major advancement in getting you forward and getting you ready for the invasion of Normandy. There's some images here. I can imagine that the anxiety that a lot of these men were feeling right now is unmatched by anything that I've ever experienced in my entire life. I'm already afraid of the ocean, so I can't imagine getting in some sort of amphibious truck thing and having people shoot cannons at me and people dying in front of me and bullets tearing through this metal and tearing through these machines. If anybody's ever seen Saving Private Ryan, which pretty much everybody has, I feel like at this point, but if you haven't, there's a really, really good scene that does a great job of explaining and showcasing just how crazy this was. Like, it was insane. I can't even imagine being able to be concentrated enough to remain on your task at hand. So it is pretty crazy. As far as the invasion goes, Eisenhower is planning the invasion as well. 21 American divisions, okay? So you have 21 American divisions, 26 British, Canadian, and Polish divisions. There are 5 beaches of Normandy, 5 beaches that we're landing on, but we probably most likely, a lot of people think of Omaha. Omaha Beach is kind of the one that you usually remember, I would say. Didn't take the sea into account. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. For sure, the fact is that you're loading up a bunch of people into a boat truck sort of thing and driving them to a beach that is full of machine guns and like weapons. You're going to have to get out of that at some point, and you might not be all the way on the beach. A lot of those vehicles got disabled before they got to the beach. Sometimes you had to swim. And if anybody knows anything about what military members are carrying, even nowadays, their equipment is very heavy. So making your way through the water with all of that equipment on, your helmet on, your weapon getting submerged in water, and maybe the complications that come in with that, all these different things are stuff that they maybe failed to take into account to some aspect. But the heroes do eventually storm the beaches, right? The heroes storm the beaches. Omaha Beach, again, like I said, is kind of the main one that we think about often. Germans offered a stiff resistance, all right? And that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to World War II. We saw it with Stalingrad, right? Even though you guys talked about Stalingrad last week, right? I think so, if you remember it. You saw it with Stalingrad. Even though it was a victory for the Russians, it was a hard-fought victory. And even though D-Day in Omaha is a victory for the United States and the Allied forces, it is not an easy victory by any means. You have 77,000 Germans dying, 18,000 British, 10,000 American, 5,000 Canadian, 650 Polish, right? All these people are kind of, fighting and living and dying on this beach, right? It's a very, very quick kind of situation. A lot of these people died over a short span of time, okay? It is the largest seaborne invasion, so there's like 7,000 vessels and 4,200 landing crafts. It's all these different guys that are coming in. I can imagine it was probably a little bit scary for the Germans to look out over the beaches and see that many people coming at them with the goal of, we're here to literally take you out. That being said, there was still kind of a tough fight, and they did hold up quite well. But eventually, they did lose, fortunately, right? Operation Fortitude and German fortifications, these are important things. Operation Fortitude is basically this operation that is working to simply confuse the Germans. A lot of people didn't think that Normandy would be the place where they would land. They didn't think that Normandy was a good spot for invasion, like the Germans, right? The Germans are like, there's no way they're going to Normandy. And then they're like, oh, they're at Normandy, essentially. Yeah.
A good, in relation to that, Hitler actually led most of his forces to point away from Normandy because he had intercepted fake documents that said that there was going to be an attack.
Exactly. So like we said, there is such deception, and there was more that goes into it than even the fake documents. Things like literal whole fake armies, right? Fake armies erected and fake inflatable boats and inflatable tanks. All these different things set up so that the Germans basically bring a lot of their military away from Normandy over time, and they bring them to maybe other sections that they think needed to be fortified more. And then lo and behold, 8,000 or so, armored vehicles show up in Normandy, and you have all these people storming the beaches, and the Germans are like, all right, did not expect that at all. Like I said, too, a lot of their fortifications weren't really set up, probably because they took a lot of people off of them and brought them to the other areas because they're like, we got them right here. This is where they're gonna invade, right? So it was a lot of deception, a lot of different things, really brilliant kind of things that had to go into making this successful. And even, you have to think, even with all of that, even with Operation Fortitude and German fortifications not quite being finished, it was still a tremendous loss of life. So you have to imagine what happens if Fortitude doesn't work, if they don't draw a lot of those German forces away. Is this still successful? Who knows, right? It's one of those parts of American history that you kind of like are not really sure about. I believe this is Arlington Cemetery. You have some cannons over here. Obviously, this is some of the stuff that you're up against when you're going in. And then all this white stuff here is all crosses, all crosses. So just kind of signifying the massive loss of life. What was D-Day? It's that invasion of Normandy, all right? So it's the invasion of Normandy. Was it successful? Yes, it was. It was a successful invasion, but it was also a tremendous, difficult loss of life. This is Mrs. Miller, I think, at one of the monuments here, a historical kind of area where you see a large amount of troops kind of going through in Paris. The Allies advance, they take Paris, and eventually they march on to Germany. And then this is another image. I don't know what that is of, actually. Hitler launched a counterattack, okay? So Hitler launches this counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge. I believe the reason why it's called the Battle of the Bulge is because it creates a bulge in the American lines. The Americans push back, forcing a German retreat. This is kind of like the last-ditch effort. This is the point where Hitler is kind of paranoid. Things are kind of falling apart. The war in Europe is not necessarily going his way. But as far as last-ditch efforts go, it was a pretty well thought-out plan. It was a pretty well coordinated and well launched plan as well. He actually had a pretty decent jump on the Allied forces. He thought that he'd be able to break through their lines and kind of mess up their supply, right? Their supply lines. That was his motivation, was to break through, disrupt their supply lines and kind of cut them off and kind of isolate a British regiment that was giving him some problems. That being said, they did not lose. The Americans pushed back. They forced a German retreat. But again, as is the name of the game, it was a victory, but it was a bloody one. It was a victory, but there was a tremendous loss of life. In fact, it was the third deadliest campaign in American history, and the single bloodiest battle fought by the United States. So you do see that with the Battle of the Bulge. It's important, but it's also important because even though once we win this battle, this is a big deal, right? It's kind of like a crushing blow to Hitler, all right? Yeah. Oh, gotcha. Here you go. So August 1944, Allies took Paris. They will eventually march on to Germany. Got it? The Allies pushed to victory. Again, this is kind of just looking at everything's kind of crumbling around Hitler at this point. April 1945, Mussolini, the leader of fascist Italy, right, the kind of dictator of Italy, is captured and executed. Goodbye, Mussolini, R.I.P. Or not, I don't know, however you look at it. German army surrounded. April 30th, Hitler and a few associates committed suicide. In specific, it's more so like Hitler and his wife. I read a couple of things. Hitler's kind of like, again, he's going paranoid. His military isn't listening to him. Nobody's listening to him. He loses a lot of his power, a lot of his control. They killed themselves, him and his wife, using cyanide. But also, he shot himself in the head because he was like, just in case, right? I don't know why. But he took a cyanide capsule. His wife took a cyanide capsule. At least it's reported. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody was in the room with them that we got the information from. So this is, some of this stuff might be debated. But took a cyanide capsule, which is basically poison. It's not a pleasant way to go. It's a little bit excruciating. And then Hitler killed himself with a pistol, probably because the cyanide didn't feel great. It is said, and this is kind of sad, that they tested the cyanide capsules on their dogs. So I guess the dogs went down with the ship too. But I don't know, they were like Nazi dogs or something, who knows? So I don't know. Do we feel bad? Probably, but whatever. It's Hitler's dog. That is what apparently happened. Whether or not that's true, I'm not entirely sure, but they did test them apparently on their dogs to see if the cyanide capsules would work. I'm guessing that they did. VE Day is Victory Day in Europe, so this is a little bit after. Obviously the news spreads. Hitler is dead. Mussolini is dead. That's pretty big news in the war effort, right? FDR basically almost makes it to the finish line and just like chucks the baton at Harry Truman because he dies. He's like, all right, I guess he got as close to the fireworks as he could before passing away. But if you know anything about FDR, he doesn't have the best health ever. He's not the healthiest president. He's got a lot of issues. So maybe the fact that he made it through this stressful time that long enough is impressive in itself. So Harry Truman takes over. Harry Truman's like the kid that comes in on the last day of you working on your group project and is like, oh, thanks. Like, I get the grades, right? But at the same time, Harry Truman is going to have some pretty crazy decisions to make. Because just because this is happening, just because it's Victory Day in Europe, doesn't necessarily mean that the war is over. Iconic images, sailor kissing a lady, I don't know. People were probably really excited during this time, I can imagine. I think if the Hoosiers won like a national title times like 10 probably, and then it applied to everybody in the United States. So probably people were pretty excited during this time. Who's the president for the end of the war? That is Harry Truman, right? He's taking over from FDR, who passes away. VE Day is Victory Day in Europe, right? Victory Day in Europe. We got a little bit more left, so not a ton of stuff left on here, but we'll go through a little bit more of this. Advancing in the Pacific, we have this strategy of island hopping. Island hopping is capturing islands while ignoring others, right? Strategically taking this island and then advancing to the next island, and so on and so forth. The idea with island hopping is that it's a steady path to Japan. As you probably know, spoiler alert, we didn't launch a full-scale invasion on Japan, right? We didn't send all these troops into Japan, but that was the plan, right? That was the idea. At this time, the atom bomb isn't necessarily developed yet. Maybe it's being worked on, but we still have to go forward with the idea that we're going to have to invade Japan. We see here a couple of did everybody get this, by the way? Everybody got that? So island hopping it's a strategy that works, but it's also very expensive, all right? Two different battles that we see here. The reason why these are more important than anything is their location, all right? Iwo Jima, 650 miles southeast of Tokyo, in Okinawa, 340 miles from Japan. These are pretty important battles, mostly because of the positioning that it gives us in our assault on Japan. But they are both, again, like I've said probably 5 times now, they're victories, but they're deadly, and they're tough. They're tough battles. They're really, really difficult. It's almost like one of the, you won, but did you really win? And so, like, yeah, you won, but you lost a lot of men, right? 23,000 Marines became casualties in Iwo Jima. You get this famous image that everybody probably knows of or has seen before. That's also where that movie Hacksaw Ridge comes from. There's a Battle of Hacksaw Ridge. Has anybody ever heard of that movie? I think it just came out a couple years ago. Basically, it talks about this guy who was, I guess, like a medic or something, or he went through and he saved a bunch of people, but he was kind of a pacifist and he never used weapons. Kind of crazy story. The atomic bomb ends the war, the most crucial scientific development all the way up until this point in history. And honestly, maybe one of the more impactful scientific developments even at this point in history is the atomic bomb. Today's nukes are way deadlier, all right? They're way deadlier than the ones that are dropped on Japan. We haven't necessarily seen something like this since, though we did see things like Chernobyl happen. We've seen things like 3 Mile Island happen in the United States. There have been times where bombs have been dropped on accident and didn't go off, thankfully. I'm pretty sure there was one that happened in the United States. Can't think of the name off the top of my head, but kind of crazy. These are insane, all right? They're insane. I took a whole class on the bomb, and just what the bomb does is absolutely horrific, honestly. The images that many of you have seen about the bomb probably don't even do it justice, genuinely. The Manhattan Project develops the A-bomb. Okay, so Albert Einstein, our favorite scientist, told President Roosevelt about the kind of plans for maybe something like this happening. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it was essentially like a race to see who would develop this first. So it was something that had to get done quickly. Albert Einstein is basically the best free agent, right? He's the United States' free agent signing of the year. He escapes the Nazis and comes to the U.S. And starts to head the Manhattan Project, which is the development of the atomic bomb. It happens in New Mexico, July 16th, 1945. The first atomic bomb was tested. She has here that scientists that worked on the bomb are going to end up dying of radiation poisoning complications. That's not every scientist, right? Not every scientist. Just because you were around the bomb doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to die, like for sure. But the likelihood of you getting something like radiation complications or radiation sickness or developing cancer is significantly higher having been around the bomb. Okay. As far as that goes, like a lot of these people were kind of normal university citizens, like people, like they would, you would have like maybe accomplished professors were brought in secretly by the government to work on this, people who were accomplished in physics. Nuclear energy or nuclear physics wasn't like a thing that was taught really at this time. After the atomic bomb happened, places like Indiana University and other places like that did end up starting to teach nuclear physics and stuff as we get into like the Cold War. But in the very beginning, you're just kind of pining and trying to see who you can find who is smart enough that can actually work through this. And even more so, a lot of these people didn't necessarily understand what they were involved in. They didn't know. They knew kind of that they were working on a bomb or a weapon, but they didn't quite know what was going to happen with that. And I think that if you look back and you talk to a lot of these people, if you could, they would probably have some sort of, remorse or regret. There's a lot of interviews with a couple of people like Oppenheimer, who didn't really talk about too much in this, but was kind of a forefront physicist in this whole situation. So something that's kind of overlooked is whether or not, did they know? Did they know what they were doing? Some of them maybe, some of them definitely did. Oppenheimer, I'm sure did, but did they agree with the use of the bomb? It's not really up to them. Like I said, Truman does have to make some pretty crazy decisions. This is something that's brought up a lot. Like I said before as well, with island hopping, you are moving forward, right? You're moving forward, island hopping. You are, your whole idea is that you're going to get closer to Japan so that you can launch an invasion. So with the invasion of Japan, Truman looks at it and he says, all right, well, if this is a math problem, if I invade Japan, it's easily going to cost me 1 million American casualties. You're invading, you're on the offensive, they're on the defensive. It's a land that you don't know. There's a lot of things that go into that. They're an island, right? That's also a huge deal. There's not really a ton of areas that you can get to. This is debated. He basically has to make the choice. Do I want to sacrifice the lives of Japanese citizens, civilians, innocents, men, women, children, or do I want to sacrifice 1 million American casualties? Whether or not that works out to like be legitimate, like whether like would it have actually happened that way? I don't know. All right. I don't know, but that's kind of the idea. That's what is debated. So what we have, obviously, he makes his choice. Spoiler alert again, the bombs are used. They're utilized. In fact, a lot of people looked at this during this time and said, what have we been doing for the past however many years developing this bomb if we're not going to use it? So they announced it. They say they have it. They dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. 60,000 people died instantly. It's like Thanos, right? In Avengers, right, or whatever. If you've seen that, when he snaps his fingers and half the population disappears, in an instant, 60,000 people are dead. 60,000, done. Japan doesn't surrender. Whether or not they're going to surrender and they're just taking their sweet time, who knows, right? That's something that's debated as well. August 9th, 3 days later, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. Maybe this would be something that would push Japan to surrender. Who knows? Regardless, the U.S. drops a second bomb. Nagasaki, 35,000 people died. These are things that were not targeted at military. All right, these were dropped on cities. These are civilians. These are innocent people. It's often that, like I said before, the actions of your country during wartime are not always going to align with your actions. Whether or not Japanese people supported the war, or maybe they didn't, or whatever, what have you, these people were civilians. Okay, August 15th is the surrender. So 6 days after, VJ Day, victory in Japan. But again, this is just some of the stuff. This is just some of the horror that comes with the bombs. Here's the deal. Here's where I stand on a lot of this stuff. I think it's less about the debate, and this maybe is a Eurocentric kind of standpoint of somebody who's from America. But to me, it's less about the debate of whether or not it should have happened, and more about the fact that we need to focus on that it did happen. I think people get too caught up in the fact that they're debating, should it happen? Should it have happened? Would this have worked? Could we have done it a different way? That we often look over the fact that this happened. This actually happened. That's looks like a lifeless child there. This is people were evaporated so quickly and blown to pieces that their shadows were painted on the buildings around them. People were deformed. And even later on, it's not even just the 60,000 lives lost. It's more than that. It's not the 100,000 people in total that were lost in the immediate bombing, but more than that too. You have things like leukemia in the area is increasing over time. You have increase in anemia, which is like a blood kind of illness. An increase in cataracts. People are developing things over their eyes where they can't see. Keloids, which are these kind of scars that turn into growths that are very uncomfortable and can be abnormal and cause a lot of swelling. Birth complications, higher infant mortality rates, vast environmental damage, right? All these different things are coming in and playing a part in the fact that we have essentially evaporated 100,000 people, just like that. And whether or not it was the right decision or not, again, that's debated. It's one of those like things that they'd probably talk to you about in like a philosophy class. You can drop a bomb and evaporate 100,000 innocent people, or you can invade a country and then lose 1 million, American soldiers. Again, whether or not those numbers work out to be the fact is, I guess, probably also debated whether or not you would lose that many American soldiers. But either way, that is something that is often overlooked, is how absolutely awful this was. So the biggest thing that I would say that I would take away from this more than anything is to understand that Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened. Don't try and find yourself in the position of, it should have happened, it shouldn't have happened. Do have those opinions, but also, more than anything, do recognize that it is absolutely tragic. It is absolutely horrific. And whether or not it turned out to be the right decision or not, it is still a horrible, horrible thing, regardless of what the outcome was. Even if it ended the war, it is still a horrible, horrible thing. What you see in this too is what you don't see actually is the people who were left behind. I read a whole book on this actually. A lady went and interviewed a lot of these people who were involved in these bombings. You see this person in the top left has like some scarring, some deformities. She interviewed a couple of people who had like facial deformities, somebody who had scarring across their whole back. The thing is that a lot of this stuff, some people were burnt to a crisp and, their skin would just slide off. It was terrible. If you were deformed in that way, you actually were often looked down upon by a lot of the people that you lived around. If people found out that you were involved, like if you were in the bombing, like you were there, or if you had a deformity or you had a deformed face or you lost an arm or a limb or people knew that you were there, they would almost like shun you. I don't know why. It was a cultural thing, I guess, or something of that nature, but the idea was that you didn't want to be around those people. You didn't give them the time of day. You looked down on them. You treated them differently and poorly. And it led to a lot of people to have social isolation and depression and horrible, horrible things, that their country had almost abandoned them after this horrible thing that the United States did to them. So you do see that, okay? Checking for understanding, I think we're okay on there. We have about 20 minutes left. Is that enough time for you guys to do a formative assessment? Is that okay? Okay. So I'll give you guys the last 20 minutes. You guys online as well. I'll give you the last 20 minutes to go through and do your formative assessment. And that should be it for the day, I think. I don't think we'll get to current events today. But if you haven't done your bell work, make sure you do your bell work and your formative number 4, I think. Does that sound good? Everybody cool with that?